Hello and welcome to Sport Unlocked, the podcast digesting the week's sports news with interviews and analysis. Coming up, an investigation into sexual harassment at FIFA shows limited action by the governing body. Also, the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, has caused offence with crass comments about biennial World Cups and the death of migrants from Africa. Offence has also been caused in the British Parliament with racial stereotyping by a cricket leader. At the Australian Open, we'll hear why T-shirts backing the Chinese tennis star Peng Shuai were initially banned. And we've an update from China on the build-up to the Beijing Olympics amid unease about transparency on COVID testing. Then, in the Premier League, there's a clampdown on imagery in NFTs and new details about how Amanda Staveley funded her part of the Newcastle takeover. As ever, you can message us at Sport Unlocked on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and you can also vote for us in the Sports Podcast Awards. The link is on our Twitter feed. I'm Rob Harris from the Associated Press, and shortly we'll be joined from Cameroon by Juliette Bouer to discuss the investigation into the stadium crush at the African Cup of Nations. Alongside me throughout the show as ever are Tarek Panja from the New York Times and Martin Ziegler from the Times. And it really has been a week of tragedy in football, with those 8 fans dying outside the Alembe Stadium as Cameroon played Comoros.
Yeah, it's been a terrible week for football. Seems like there was a terrible mistake in the organisation. A gate was kept locked. Pictures are shown of people climbing over the fences, because another problem where the fans knew that the stadium wasn't completely full due to COVID reasons. So I think it's a really serious question, both for the CAF, the Confederation of African Football, and for the local organisers. And I think they both share responsibility for this.
Yeah. Martin, Rob and I were at Wembley in the summer for the Euro 2020 final. And seeing the scenes there, it just brought memories of that day as well, and just how close England came to tragedy on that day in June. And it just made me think about the line in the report into that incident, saying that fatalities and serious injuries were only narrowly avoided. And when you see something like this, it does bring that home. I know these football tournaments are things to get people excited for. Countries get revved up for this, but we've had, in the space of less than a year, these two things happening. It does make you wonder what can be done. This is not like, this has happened in Cameroon. This has happened in London not so long ago. It just screams of a lack of preparedness from the people organising this to almost anticipate this is going to happen, second time in a row. It's really worrying. Let's hope it's not a trend, and I really do hope there's going to be a thorough analysis of what happened in Cameroon and measures taken. This is a new stadium, several $100 million. This one in Douala as well. It really shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, a reminder of the actual lack of joined up thinking at time between tournament organisers and the police in terms of how they react, and particularly in this case in Cameroon, those split-second decisions about, do you open a gate, do you close a gate, and obviously something that was explored and continues to be over the decades since Hillsborough too.
Well, there's something that would be good to understand. That stadium, it seemed like on the eve of the tournament, appeared to be going through last-minute works. Didn't seem to have had a test event as well. It just shows you the importance of being well prepared. I mean, it's one thing maybe that thankfully it looks like with the World Cup coming up on the horizon in November, that most of the stadiums, not all of them, are going to be ready well before time in Qatar.
Well, we can hear now from the Confederation of African Football President, Patrice Motsepe, with what he initially thinks went wrong on Monday night.
And I'm told that some of the people came just to be part of the atmosphere, and including those who didn't have tickets. So I think we do accept that thousands of people, more than what was expected, did arrive. What happened yesterday in terms of the proximity of people being allowed to the stadium in a manner that is not properly coordinated and governed will never happen again. Should not happen again. I went to see where the people lost their lives. And you see, it's a gate. It was supposed to be open, because if it was opened, they would have walked through. And it was closed for reasons, for inexplicable reasons. It was closed. If that gate was open as it was supposed to, we wouldn't have had this problem we have now, this loss of life. So of course, as part of the hearing, we want to know, but who closed that gate? Who's responsible for that gate?
Well, we can turn now to Cameroon, and we're joined now by the Ghanaian journalist Juliet Boer, who is at the game. Juliet, welcome to Sport Unlocked.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure. I'm currently in Douala.
Juliet, what was it like to be at the stadium on Monday night, and what do you think went wrong?
It must be said that this is really unfortunate. Remember that this is a stadium that hosts about 60,000 capacity people. And prior to the start of the tournament, CAF said it was going to apply a 60% quota on attendance at all match venues due to the COVID restrictions. However, for games involving the host Cameroon, the cap was increased to 80%. So due to how the Cameroonian team have performed so far in the tournament, there have been a natural yen for them. And the match against Comoros, we saw that was one of such where a huge number of fans waited outside wanting to get in. And from an eyewitness account, after the fans grew impatient at the southern entrance, some sought to overpower the security, attempting to break in, and they did open the gates wide, and that left to the unfortunate incident that happened. So, for me, a lot of questions has to be asked. I'm asking myself. I was in the stadium, and I'm asking, why were there too many fans at the stadium? Because this 80% of that 60,000 will give you about 45,000, but I can't count the number of people at the stadium. From where I sit, there were too many people, too many fans in the stadium, which probably might be something more than the 45,000 that they were supposed to get in. So who is responsible for that? We've also heard that is FECAFOOT President Samuel Eto'o also having a press conference and talking about the unfortunate incident and how their part as the organizing body and everything, they will try and get things right. But we also have to say that everything that happened inside the stadium is the jurisdiction of CAF, but anything that happens outside the stadium is of that of the local organizing committee. So it was very unfortunate, but a dent to what has been a beautiful tournament so far.
Interesting that you say that you even recognise that there were too many people inside the stadium. We've seen pictures of supporters climbing over fences, so clearly that contributed to this. But it seems to me that there should be sort of joint responsibility for this from CAF and the local organisers, because when you have so many people turning up to a football match and tensions and excitement is so high, it's almost like you've got to be absolutely on the ball to make sure that these things don't happen. And you only need one closed gate, and that can cause serious problems.
Juliet, just on the ground, we've had all these statements you've mentioned from all these various people, but what is the feeling? Not from CAF or FIFA but people you know around the stadium. That's a huge tragedy. It's devastating. What was the feeling there in the aftermath?
The feeling was that of calmness, that of sadness, because lives have been lost. So clearly, you would have people who are a bit angry about what happened, and they've lost their loved ones. Some people were also trying to put names of their family who went to the stadium and haven't returned home on social media, which was trending for the past days. So um, the feeling is that of sadness in Yaoundé at the time that happened. But like they say, they always, on the other hand, are looking forward to what is also happening on the pitch. But we can't overemphasize enough that the feeling here on Sunday was one that, if I should put it that way, saying we could have prevented this. We could have listened to maybe authorities, if you don't have tickets, you don't have to go to the stadium, so that you can also help authorities, or you help people dealing with this much better. But on the other hand, you can't blame anyone, as in the fans. They are not the ones to blame here. If you put in the right measures, and you, right from the entrance, if you cordon off some places, and if someone doesn't have a ticket, the person even doesn't get close to the stadium to talk, or to, let alone try to force the gate open to get into the main stadium. So the feeling here was sadness, people wailing, people not having access to their family members who didn't come back from the stadium, and people also talking about it in Douala, in other places as well, and trying to find out exactly what must have gone wrong. So that's what we are waiting for.
The tournament, had to be moved, and there was all this questions about readiness and preparedness, etc. Do you know if there was a risk analysis or report, or concerns or about this new stadium and the before the tournament? Do you know if there was any concerns that is everything ready as it should be before?
So before the tournament, I think that there were so many concerns that the stadium wasn't ready, and you remember that when Cameroon, they gave them the bid for the Nations Cup, it was 16 teams then, and then it had to be increased to 24. So there are so many things that people were talking about. It got to a point, I think, few days or a week to the tournament, they had to cordon off the place. They had to make sure that no media is taking pictures of that place, because remember, they were supposed to have done a bit of an opening of the stadium, which got postponed. So it raised a lot of eyebrows. People were wondering, is this stadium really ready for everything that they are supposed to do? But from all indications, works at the Olympic stadium, they said before the tournament, it was progressing. Contractors were looking at the finishing touches and everything, which was quite not okay from the people in Cameroon, like the locals. When you speak to them, they keep telling you it wasn't ready. They keep telling you it wasn't ready. They are racing around time to get it ready, because so many things, the dressing room, the presidential suite and everything was being done more or less like in a rush to make sure that we get things sorted. So it was a bit of like a tense situation in there, because that's the stadium that was going to host some of the key matches and even the final. So the project manager or the project director and everything, there was a lot of pressure on them to deliver. But at the time or before the tournament, it was clear that some things were not right, especially with that stadium. It had to receive huge delegations from the ministers. It had to receive huge delegation from CAF and everyone before the tournament, making sure that this project or this stadium will be ready. But I remember the project director saying the playing field, at the time the playing field is finished and it is ready to be used for a match and all that. But it's had its up and downs, that venue.
How do you feel reporting on the tournament still, knowing these deaths have happened? And is there a sense it's right for the tournament to go on? And how do you assess the tournament as a whole on the pitch? It's difficult to sort of mix up the conversation, but this is a tournament that began with a lot of European clubs complaining about players having to go to be released and miss out on domestic games, and it is the flagship event. How do you assess things on the pitch and whether or not it should have continued?
The 8 people who died, it's unfortunate and it should never have happened. I believe the tournament must or should still go on. It has definitely has been a good tournament so far. Beyond that stampede, that's been the beauty we have seen so far. It has been an amazing ride with so many interesting things to note, and I'm sure you've also witnessed that. And yes, indeed, it was a smart, like I mentioned, earlier, it was really a smart thing for them to go 24 teams. We've spoken about how the expanded AFCON also gave teams to express themselves. One might say, oh, they are minnows, they don't know what they're about. But like the Africa Cup of Nations has shown, there are no minnows these days in African football. The likes of Cape Verde, the likes of Comoros, Equatorial Guinea wouldn't have a seat in previous AFCONs, but now they are here and making sure that they are rubbing shoulders with the big nations.
You talk about the expansion of AFCON. Of course, the big focus at FIFA in recent times has been expanding the World Cup, and the only continental confederation to give backing so far to FIFA's push for biennial World Cups is Africa. And this very week, we've had the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, linking the plan to double the frequency of World Cups to the need to give more hopes to Africans, and particularly migrants, suggesting that they can be inspired not to risk their lives crossing the sea to come to Europe if they have more football tournaments. It really has caught a lot of criticism, and this is what he had to tell the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe in that speech.
I understand. In Europe, the World Cup takes place twice per week because the best players are playing in Europe. So in Europe, there is no need for additional possibilities and events. But if we think about the rest of the world, and also if we think about Europe, the vast majority of Europe, who doesn't see the best players, who doesn't participate in the top competitions, then we have to think about what football brings, which goes beyond the sport. Because football is about what I was saying at the very beginning, about opportunities, about hope, about national teams, about the country, about the heart, about the joy, about the emotion. And we cannot say to the rest of the world, give us your money. If you have or happen to have a good player by coincidence, give us the player as well. But watch us on TV. We need to include them. We need to find ways to include the entire world, to give hope to Africans so that they don't need to cross the Mediterranean in order to find maybe a better life, but more probably death in the sea. We need to give opportunities, and we need to give dignity, not by giving charity, but by allowing the rest of the world as well to participate.
Gianni Infantino there speaking to European parliamentarians, and those comments really have been called by some activists as crass, particularly the way he's using the plight of really desperate people to sell his idea for biennial World Cups. Julia, how have Infantino's comments gone down across the continent of Africa, and particularly where you are at the African Cup of Nations in Cameroon?
Well, just like you saw it quite offensive in Europe, nothing changes here. It's the same thing. You know, the reaction was normal. So many people, I remember when the statement was said, or when it started sharing the videos, I was in the media center at the Japoma Stadium, and so many media colleagues were talking about it. Nobody understood the correlation between how you helping seize Africans traveling on the Mediterranean from an expanded World Cup. So for me personally, I was pleasantly surprised, or a bit surprised, how that connection came in. Because if we are talking about increasing the numbers, or if we're talking about playing World Cup every 2 years, we are making a business case. And everybody knows it's a business case. So it's important that we try to streamline what we talk about, and not, although the African MAs have accepted, or in a way are trying to back the 2-year World Cup format, but from where it comes from is clearly a business case, and it must be noted as that, or it must be said as that. But using it to link to how Africans is going to help Africans in the Mediterranean cross and not die and everything, I think it was a bit quite too much. But what the conversation should be about, it should be about how African teams will get enough slots at the World Cup. I'm saying this not to also look or overlook the part that African teams must do better when they go to the World Cup, because if you're calling for an increment in numbers that go to the World Cup, we have to see African teams going past maybe quarterfinals or semifinals, which will be a just cause or a just case when you are advocating for more slots. So although we are saying, okay, you need to give Africa more slots, it's also important to know that the African teams, when you go to the Nations Cup, when you go to the World Cup, what do you do? What kind of performance do you give off? Or all of you get crashed out of the group stage or even run of 16 stage? It's also important to know that. But that should be a conversation.
Well, conversations that the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, claimed to have during the week were with numerous, as the CAF statement put it, football presidents of African nations, supporting the speech that Gianni Infantino delivered at the Council of Europe. It was an incredible statement that dropped on Friday night, and it said several commentators unfortunately seem to have misunderstood and misinterpreted President Infantino's speech. He stated that football is one of the tools that should contribute to the economic and social development and upliftment of many Africans, and also to building a better future and dignity amongst many people on the African continent. The statement went on to state, President Infantino did not say that the FIFA World Cup every 2 years will stop Africans from crossing the Mediterranean Sea. Now, that statement goes against exactly what we can hear on the tape. It was a filmed speech at the Council of Europe, and we've now got CAF being part of FIFA's attempts at revisionism to make us not believe what we heard with our own ears, and it just reinforces this sense a year after Motsepe was elected CAF president that he really is so closely aligned with Gianni Infantino that in this case he's trying to give him cover for comments that have been so widely condemned.
I saw FIFA media tweeting that Gianni says his comment has been taken out of context. But if you know that people who watch the video realize that this is not something that has been taken out of context. This is something that was really said. So it's important to note that in as much as people were not happy with what happened, in terms of how it gets connected to Africa, and it was easily connected to Africa, which baffles my mind a bit. People are not speaking up, and like you and I don't know why people are not speaking up, because they have to speak up from where, especially from where they said they have to be able to criticize.
I also thought that FIFA's attempt to sort of justify this by saying his comments have been taken out of context. I mean, I went back and watched the whole thing again just to make sure that they hadn't been, and they absolutely hadn't been taken out of context. He goes from within, without blinking, without a sort of a hesitation. He goes from talking about expanding FIFA's competitions to somehow saying that we need to give hope to people in Africa to stop them crossing the Mediterranean and probably dying in this Mediterranean Sea. I mean, if I had been him, I would have just have apologized and said, I got my words terribly confused or something about that, because it just sounded terrible. And it wasn't just the media who picked up on that. There are plenty of people who are absolutely, within football and sport generally, who were really offended by it.
And why do you think CAF put that statement out backing Gianni Infantino so strongly?
It may be because we know Gianni Infantino has sort of a lot of pulling a lot of strings in African football these days. So maybe people don't want to get on his wrong side.
And it's not some isolated statement, because just a few months ago, he was talking about, in the context of the fight against discrimination, Europe trying to deny Africa's right to play at World Cups more often.
Yeah, he's been guilty of making these kind of offensive statements, with whether obviously he's not aiming to, but these words seem to pop into his mouth with alarming regularity. It just shows that perhaps you're not learning from your mistakes. And, we can all make a mistake and then hopefully you learn from them. But it just seems every time someone puts a mic in front of his mouth, something that could offend large swathes of people could pop out of it. Even the kind of, I felt, rather flippant remark a year or so ago when he talked about this joint Middle Eastern World Cup with Israel and its neighboring countries as this sort of a sign of securing peace in the region. Again, that after so much bloodshed, this idea that he could just chuck that out offended a few people as well. With what he said on this week, someone close to him said, well, look, honestly, his intention was completely different than the way it's been read. The point is, even if you, with complete charity, say, okay, yeah, he's trying to make a different point, why would you use that analogy? Why would you get yourself in a situation, in such a pickle? Just don't use that type of language. Don't use that type of imagery. But time and again, he seems to have no issue with adopting language like that or that sort of imagery. And then the clarification statement that was put out by FIFA, again, just didn't seem to have much contrition at all. It was just everyone else's fault for taking it the wrong way.
And the issue with the attempt by FIFA to put that clarification statement out is a written statement, a Twitter thread, is never going to usurp in terms of coverage comments said on camera that were making news bulletins around the world, particularly given some of the implausibility and just the crass nature of his comments does reinforce the impression perhaps those around him might not be challenging him, and these might be comments and things and beliefs that he's expressing quite often. And if you are in a bubble, then you start to believe in the importance of your own events, your own business, the FIFA, the World Cup in this case, and perhaps that's reinforced by the close associates you're travelling with.
There is a touch of megalomania about the whole thing, I have to say. This sort of incredible self-belief that you're right, everybody else is wrong, and you can do no wrong yourself. I was just interested. I know FIFA are trying to somehow get Africa involved in the 2030 World Cup. There's been suggestions that Morocco could co-host with Spain, for example. Do you get any sense when you speak to people in African football that's a genuine possibility?
Sorry, a genuine possibility for?
Do you think there's a genuine possibility that Africa could somehow be involved in hosting the 2030 World Cup? Because I know FIFA have possibly made inquiries about whether Morocco could co-host with Spain.
It's only the Morocco bid that seem vibrant now, because you also have to know that if you're not co-hosting, like is happening in some other part, it's really difficult in terms of the infrastructure. When you look at the 54 countries, if it's not Morocco, if it's not maybe Egypt, or maybe you can just mention a few, it'll be really difficult for me to say that an African maybe country can host the World Cup. Remember, it's not just infrastructure; it comes with so many other things. And if your economy is not even that great, it will cripple it more. So it's important that we also be aware of all those things. And currently, looking at Morocco's bid, I think is the most relevant one to do.
Juliet, thank you for joining us from your 5th African Cup of Nations. Enjoy the final stages.
Well, thank you very much for having me here.
A busy time there for Juliet in Cameroon. Now, in further FIFA news this week, Tarek, your reporting has been pretty thorough, investigating sexual harassment allegations at FIFA involving the Legends programme.
Yeah, this was a story that I've been working on for a few months now. I heard in late 2021 that there was an allegation made by a female FIFA official that Miguel Macedo, the head of FIFA's Legends program, tell the listeners what that is as well. This is when FIFA travels around the world with this retinue of former star players, gathers them together for games where normally, people like Gianni Infantino are playing. And most recently, we've had them all backing this idea of the biennial World Cup. So they serve quite a useful function to the FIFA president. Well, this man, a Portuguese agent, Miguel Macedo, who came into FIFA with Gianni Infantino, having brought legends to his campaign to become FIFA president, has basically been under investigation, or was under investigation for several months, after a female staffer in his office made a complaint to Human Resources, basically over sexual harassment and bullying. And it took a while, but we've got documents here as well. FIFA hired an ombudsman to look into it, and the claims from this woman, pretty grim, pretty grimy as well. That he sent her text messages, for example, asking her whether she liked high heels, asking her, commenting on her dress, telling her that she owed him obedience, things like this. And the ombudsman said there was proof in these messages that was sexual harassment, and also that this man, her superior, had led her to believe that there was a future at FIFA for her because she was a contractor at the time. Taken to the Human Resources department, the lady's contract ended. She was gone.
So what happened next then?
It was only months later, after she kept pushing, that the head of HR, Kimberly Morris, and a committee wrote to her and said, yes, her complaint had been upheld over sexual harassment, but only one instance in 2018, a verbal comment, didn't say what it was, didn't say how it was punished. And this man continues to be the head of the FIFA Legends program, which is galling. In one instance as well, she said this man physically sort of approached her, came very close, touched her backside and whispered words into her ear about her body. Now, no one should have to face this at work. And if they do, the person who has allegedly done this should be sanctioned and, to be honest, should be got rid of. FIFA, we sent detailed questions to, gave them more than a day to reply. They missed the deadline, and they gave a very short response, 2 sentences really, saying they take any allegation of wrongdoing in the workplace extremely seriously and has robust reporting mechanisms. And it won't comment any further. The thing is, that statement really belies all the reporting. The lady is still working in football. She's very brave, to be honest. Spoke to her several times, but she feels completely lost, that she wasted her time. And what makes it more galling for her, she's now working in Qatar, related to football projects there. The FIFA Arab Cup was held in December this year. She saw him there, which was shocking. And she said she has to see these people again, and she feels they're just laughing at her. I know he's laughing about it.
Yeah, some great investigative work there, Tarek, and really good to hold governing bodies like this to account. What was the explanation from FIFA to why he's still there?
They didn't refer to him at all in the reply we got. It was, like I said, 2 sentences, and they said they won't be commenting any further on the case. So basically shutting the door on any further questions and kind of disappearing.
And what we really see in this is this constant use of the phrase zero tolerance by FIFA when they're talking about sexual harassment more broadly in the game. It just shows it's a complete fallacy. As we've seen in this case, there is not zero tolerance.
Well, it's about, they have all the processes and these rule books. And this thing with all the governing bodies, particularly FIFA, with Infantino, before with Blatter as well, you have these ethics bodies, you have sanctioning powers, etc. But when it gets to people, it seems, when it gets to people who are close to power or close to leadership, these sanctioning powers and the process seems to dissolve. And that's what's really unfortunate for junior staff members. Like, since the story was published, about a bunch of people come forward to say that's exactly what they remember happening. There's probably more cases. So this idea that there are people who are suffering there or in any other organisation but don't feel any confidence that they'll be heard is, for me, a really scary part of this.
And at the heart of it is trust in FIFA. They ask for trust. Gianni Infantino keeps on quoting the Department of Justice from the US saying how FIFA has changed in the last 5 years or so since the investigations as a trusted body. But things like this, cases like this, do raise so many doubts about whether they can even be trusted with their own internal investigations.
Yeah, completely. You know, the thing that I also find a little bit, shocking is that the person himself, the man who's been accused, Miguel Museda, we also offered, him a chance through them to speak for himself or to deny any of this. And we haven't got that. And, with any bit of fair reporting, you have to give the other side the right to reply. And we did, as far as I'm concerned. And, the fact we haven't heard any comment from Mr. Macedo himself is a little bit surprising or shocking.
Certainly important reporting there on the world of FIFA. Moving away from football into cricket, and in the British Parliament, yet another offensive performance and testimony by a sports leader in front of the Department of Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. This relates to the ongoing investigations into racism in English cricket. This time it was the Middlesex chairman, Mike O'Farrell, who made these comments about why he believes Black and Asian players are less interested in going on to play the sport.
The other thing in the diversity bit is that the football and rugby world becomes much more attractive to the Afro-Caribbean community. And in terms of the South Asian community, there is a moment where we're finding that they do not want necessarily to commit the same time that is necessary to go to the next step, because they prefer, not always saying they do it, they sometimes prefer to go into other educational fields, and then cricket becomes secondary. And part of that is because it's a rather more time-consuming sport than some others. So we're finding that's difficult. Now that's changing with the 2020 sort of sport and the one-day games. But we are now finding that we're coming full circle, because the game is getting more exposed. There's much more choice, there's much more variation in the games, and therefore the South Asian community, young men and women, particularly the women, are finding this a much more attractive sport. So we are moving it forward. It's not as fast as we'd like it to, and we're trying to make as many opportunities as we can.
That is Mike O'Farrell, and later he did apologise for what he called any upset or hurt caused by his comments, saying it was definitely not his intention. Another partial apology from a sports leader.
Yeah, I always think those sorts of any upset caused is always, to me, that was like, sounds bad. It doesn't sound like a wholehearted apology, and I mean, immediately, within minutes of him saying it, we had people like Ebony Jewel Rainford Brent saying, she's a director of Cricket. She is saying these outdated views are exactly why we are in the position we're in regarding lack of Black and Asian players, and said it's the decision makers who are holding on to the myths, and the game deserves better.
Again, these committees are really show up these football or sports executives, don't they? I just remember the then FA chairman Greg Clark in 2017 having to issue a similar apology when he sat in front of a panel there at Parliament and described institutional racism as fluff. And now having to do a man of similar standing, similar appearance, having to issue a similar grovelling apology. What is it, Martin, with that committee? It seems to really get people's innermost feelings out in the clear.
I think they're under a bit of stress, and they think that they can. They sort of like, if they talk long enough and make themselves sound sort of thoughtful and intuitive, then it will sort of get them off the hook. But actually, all it does is sort of expose their prejudices or lack of insight, and the best you can say is outdated views.
And very often the lack of diversity in the leadership around them, and that influences their opinions to have such outdated, stereotypical, lazy assumptions like this. Well, the subject of discrimination and offence isn't just one for English cricket. We're looking ahead to the Beijing Olympics beginning next week, and it's the discriminatory actions of the Chinese authorities, their crackdown on the Uyghur population, which is the focus of human rights groups as we approach the start of the Winter Games, and particularly their treatment of the tennis star Peng Shuai, who still is in China. He's not had independent access to media beyond the country. The IOC president, Thomas Bach, is to be meeting her, but still on Chinese territory after she made sexual harassment allegations. And at the Australian Open tennis tournament, there's been an attempt to show solidarity with her with T-shirts that initially the organisers tried to stop.
Yeah, that was to me. I thought this was absolutely scandalous by Tennis Australia. The security guards were telling people to take the T-shirts off, say where is Peng Shuai, and it then turns out that one of the Australian Open's main sponsors is the state-owned Chinese alcohol distillery Luzhu Laijiao, and one of the main show courts at Melbourne Park is named after one of the brands of that Chinese sponsor, and the deals are estimated to be around £40 million over 5 years. So that clearly explains why Tennis Australia was so sensitive about this. All you can say is that the pressure forced them to back down, and thank God they did.
Speaking of Peng Shuai, another organisation that appears to be running cover for the Chinese in this is the IOC. Another statement ahead of the Beijing Olympics from the IOC saying they have kept up these conversations with Peng Shuai. If you remember, Thomas Bach had said he's going to have a dinner date with her in Beijing. He's now in Beijing. I'm sure that will happen, but whether there's any access to Peng Shuai for anyone else rather than some images of the day and more public relations remains to be seen. It's quite, to me, quite striking how the IOC is happy to be used in this process. I'm sure the Chinese hosts are thankful for that, but how that makes the International Olympic Committee and Thomas Bach look in the eyes of the rest of the world is maybe a different matter, guys.
Serving as cover for China and this, I would say, image cleansing exercise, but these are Beijing Games that are beginning with athletes arriving and media travelling with concerns about coronavirus, the quarantine restrictions, and so much of the coverage, obviously, that will be magnified and sharpened on Chinese treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minorities. And given the restrictive access around these games, I can only see it being an Olympics that actually just sharpens the focus and criticism of the Chinese regime rather than being a celebration around the world.
I wouldn't imagine any images of any reporting even from anywhere outside of that. It's such a tight bubble. The restrictions are enormous. Even within the loop, the reporters there are shuttled from buses from venue to venue to hotels. There's not much room to freely report at all, even within there. So in terms of the topics that you mentioned there, Rob, they might be discussed, but it'll be very hard to report on them. There was an interesting comment, Rob, you mentioned about the concerns about getting into China. Some teams are concerned about the transparency around the testing.
What are they concerned might happen?
So basically, the Chinese require daily PCR testing, pretty invasive PCR testing, and those who are found to be positive or close contacts, well, positive will be in quarantine for several days, and close contacts for 5 days, I understand. But the issue is there was a German team leader suggested that there's no transparency about whether someone. He's not confident whether the positives are positives or whether they can follow up. The Chinese have complete control over who gets chucked into quarantine. And again, it shows the disquiet and unease about being there. Like, I don't remember similar comments made about Tokyo, for example. It seems that a lot of these teams simply don't want to be there.
Well, and one of the advantages of having the Olympics in China, as we saw in 2008, will at least be a rare chance for media to have free access to move around and report. And that just won't happen this time under the cover of pandemic restrictions. And you just wonder how many countries like China will seek to use coronavirus for some time to come as a means of actually prohibiting the movements of media to conduct independent reporting.
That's a good point, Rob. Another interesting thing I've heard this week. So in the International Media Centre in Beijing, all the people have been promised that you can have unrestricted access to the sort of Western news sites. So the BBC, Google, the Twitter, all these things you can, because normally you can't get them in China. And it does turn out that you can actually access just about all of these news websites. Apart from, as far as I know, that the Times, the English Times, not New York Times, it still remains unavailable in Beijing. So maybe it's something we've done.
Maybe they haven't paid their subs, Six.
The most important thing for people to find out on the ground in Beijing is whether Sport Unlocked is allowed by the Chinese authorities. Is there any block on us?
Yeah, good question.
Well, maybe the Newcastle director, Amanda Staveley, wouldn't be liking the pod to be heard. Some comments by the 10% owner of Newcastle now to us and some other journalists back in November at a Premier League meeting are now the source of some legal action by the departed Newcastle owner, Mike Ashley. What exactly is it that Mike Ashley is troubled about? What Amanda Staveley had to say to us?
I think there's sort of two aspects to it. One is in regard to taking down the Sports Direct branding from the stadium, because the court filing claims that that should stay until the end of the season. And the other allegation is that some of the remarks were disparaging about him, which also breached contracts. I thought the more interesting thing actually from the court filing was the claim in this High Court document from St James's Holdings Limited, saying that neither Amanda Staveley nor her firm PC Capital Partners, and I'm quoting here, had the funds necessary, close quotes, to buy her 10% stake in the club. So it states she had to borrow 30.5 million from the Reuben brothers for the shareholding, and a further 10 million from Mike Ashley himself to cover costs and commissions and legal costs as well.
Yeah, Martin, because we specifically asked her how she funded her 10% stake, and she told us a completely different story. Rob, you have that, don't you?
Yeah, let's take a listen to that audio from the hotel lobby on the record after the Premier League meeting as Amanda Staveley spoke to us.
Is this a big stretch for you personally?
No, not at all.
Are you loaded then?
No, I'm not loaded.
No, I mean, it's important.
We wouldn't be buying I feel very happy and comfortable with the investment we're making.
Is it your biggest one personally?
No, actually, I'm just buying. Next week we're buying something, a big estate. I'm buying personally. Audrey Hepburn's estate should go through next week, and we're buying a hotel and three other. No, I bought a hotel in LA, in New York from the Reubens, which was about 60 million. We sold it, which was where the capital for this came from.
Yeah, so there she is saying that use the proceeds of the sale of a hotel to buy as the capital. So something is not quite as it seems there. We await to see the court response from Amanda Staveley. That should be enlightening too.
Newcastle haven't quite got into the business yet of NFTs, I don't think. Maybe that's their next move.
Well, everybody else is, aren't they? So there's been a couple of crypto developments this week, both I think quite interesting. One is the Premier League consulting their lawyers because John Terry, the former England captain, is promoting these non-fungible tokens, pictures of apes. And his profile picture on Twitter, in fact, is one of these with the Premier League trophy. Now that's unlicensed use of that image, so that's why the Premier League is looking at that. And one of the big fan engagement platforms in sport had deals in La Liga, Crystal Palace, Essex Cricket, McLaren Formula One, lots of rugby league teams. It's called Iconic, and it's gone into liquidation. And anybody who bought their cryptocurrency, basically, it's now valueless.
I mean, there's a couple of issues around this. One is the actual currency used to buy the NFTs, the unregulated, very unstable cryptocurrency, and also why anyone would want an NFT at all. And some people portray us as maybe being a bit outdated when we sort of question the value of them and saying actually youngsters are more tapped into this market. It's about the future of the metaverse. One expert on this, speaking to Sam Cunningham of the iPaper this week, defending NFTs, saying you could walk outside your house, you see a Ferrari on the street, take a picture of it, put it on your Instagram. It doesn't mean that you own it, in the sense of, can't you just right click and save a copy and picture of these images that people are buying of NFTs? And he was trying to say otherwise, but I just still can't see the value of this. It just seems a complete waste of money.
That explains exactly why they're worthless. Because anyone can take a picture of that Ferrari, but that doesn't mean you own the Ferrari. Even so with the NFT, all you own is your name on an electronic ledger somewhere. That is it. All you own. You own nothing physical. So it is a complete. In my mind, it's a complete waste of money, and it's all going to come crashing down.
And anyway, we do see very often influencers actually posing in houses, in cars they don't even own, to present a particularly completely different lifestyle, more extravagant and wealthy, on Instagram that isn't even theirs. They don't own these things, but they pose in front of them just for sense of image on there.
Yeah, there's been another sort of related and really interesting development we've had this week with Socios, the sort of big fan engagement platform. They had a 3-year deal with the Argentina FA, signed a year ago. Suddenly that's been replaced by this exchange Binance, who even got the naming rights to the Argentinian league. And people who've bought these Argentinian fan tokens with Socios are now in this position where, I mean, the so-called engagement has sort of just completely disappeared. They've spent this money, they've got these tokens. The value of them has dropped. Not surprisingly, Socios are taking legal action, and it just shows it's a wild west.
Martin, is the Premier League going to issue any guidelines on this now? We've talked about NFTs now for a number of editions of Sport Unlocked, for example, and there's been a lot of disquiet among fan groups. Is the league saying, or the FA, is someone going to step in here with some regulation?
They're saying they're looking at it, but I think they're going to sort of hide behind legislation. There is no legislation. The Financial Conduct Authority told me this week that they are proposing rules to bring them in line with, for example, gambling and other sort of high-risk financial investments in terms of promotions. But that probably won't cover NFTs. That will just cover cryptocurrency. So NFTs may be excluded from that. And so that's going to be an issue for the Premier League. But at the same time, as I think I mentioned previously, the Premier League is cautiously exploring itself whether to sell NFTs to raise money, which I think would be a really big mistake.
But revenue by more conventional means coming into the Premier League from their international TV deal still, as they rack up the cash.
Yeah, so it looks like the Eclat Media Group has acquired the TV rights for Japan and South Korea for the next cycle, beginning 2022 to 23, i.e. next season, outbidding DAZN, who've had the rights at the moment in Japan. And it sounds like it's a fairly significant increase to the current cycle. So yet another win chalked up for the Premier League, because I think they were worried about in other Asian markets going down, for example, possibly Singapore, possibly Malaysia. I think there's some concern that they may go down. But generally, this is very much on the up, as we've seen in lots of other markets.
Martin, you mentioned DAZN losing the rights there. That's quite significant too. They've had an interesting week. They've hiked their prices up by 50% in large parts of the world. A lot of criticism from users there, and we still await their delayed company results. The last ones showed losses of more than £1 billion on earnings in 2019. We're still waiting for the current one. And at the same time, you and others have reported that they're in talks or looking close to securing BT's Premier League rights in the UK, their sports business. So
yeah, well, they've been close to that for 6 months apparently.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting trying to tie all these things together. A company that's hemorrhaging lots of cash is about to do a massive deal apparently in the UK, and also hiking its prices up. To me, it seems some things are not as stable as those who run DAZN might like them to be.
They're probably just still enticed by the ongoing appeal of live sport, as we've seen with the NFL's divisional games. That's effectively the quarterfinals, to use a bit of football parlance, in the build up to the Super Bowl, because they averaged 37 million viewers for each of those 4 games last weekend in the US. So pretty significant, and that's across multiple networks too.
Well, we've had our own successes, haven't we, actually, talking about audiences. We are hit number 9 in the sports podcast chart in Greece, and number 26 in Mongolia. Ulaanbaatar, here we come.
So we should say thank you to the folks in Mongolia. So Mongoldu Bayarala.
It's great to have so many of you listening from all around the world. We really appreciate it. Tarek, Martin, great to speak as ever. Thanks for all your insight. Thanks also to Juliette Bua earlier on too from Cameroon. For now, thank you all for listening. Whatever sport you're viewing in the days ahead, I hope you enjoy it. Goodbye for now from Sport Unlocked.